Today on Huntley Hope, hidden homelessness in Canada, turning the tide on a national problem.
What is hidden homelessness? I didn't really understand that term when I first heard it. I wasn't sure what we were referring to.
Yeah, well, just, I love stats. Just to give you some stats, nearly 1 in 10 Canadians have experienced hidden homelessness. And we're talking about people who might have a day job, but maybe living paycheck to paycheck, can't afford rent, maybe can't afford to buy a home. So they're couch surfing. They're living with family, they're living with friends just to get by. They're depending on food banks just to get by.
It doesn't look like what we assume. When we say homelessness, I've been on the street and you see a desolate person.
Yeah.
That's not the same thing. This is a completely different issue.
This can literally be the person sitting in the cubicle right beside you that can't afford to live.
Canadians with a stable place of residence who had not moved within the last 5 years were least likely to have experienced hidden homelessness at some point of their life.
This is an issue affecting communities all across Canada. Kelowna, BC is no different. Our Cheryl Weber connects with a church trying to make a difference in its community when it comes to the issue of hidden homelessness.
Cheryl, over to you.
It's one of the most popular retirement locations in the country, but what most don't realize is that it also is the 5th highest city per capita in Canada for homelessness. That makes the work of Metro Community in Kelowna, British Columbia even more significant. Its lead pastor, Lawrence East, joins me to talk about it now. Hi, Lawrence.
Hi there.
Your work is amazing. Tell me what you do with Metro Community.
Well, Metro started about 8 or 9 years ago, really amongst the street community. I was fortunate enough to just be there trying to see what God was up to in that context. And, it really emerged as a street church. But then very shortly afterwards, we sort of outgrew the little space we had borrowed. We moved into a nightclub on Sunday mornings, and a whole bunch of middle-class folks started showing up, but it always had this beautiful dynamic of the have-nots welcoming the haves into their church, so to speak. And today it's a flourishing community of people from many different walks of life. And we have a daytime center where most of anyone who's connected to the street in our city pretty much called home. We'd have a couple of hundred folks in there a day. We have art studios, music studios. We have a community garden. We have social enterprises so people can get involved in getting back into work and finding that God-given dignity again and that confidence. And we have lots of partnerships with other agencies and businesses so that we can help people transition. We don't replicate what other people do. We're not an agency. We have this beautiful privilege of being a church, but one that is engaged in matters of justice and dignity and hope. And now more and more as a sort of voice in even sort of provincial sort of discussions around reform on welfare and those sorts of things. So it's a huge privilege, but we're still a very small, relatively powerless world, in world terms, a powerless community. And so one of our values is having the most vulnerable at our very center and giving them the loudest voice. And that has proven to be a profound and powerful thing.
Beautiful. We've dedicated this program to kind of go beyond even just homelessness, but to talk about hidden homelessness or the working poor, people who are struggling with homelessness that we wouldn't even know by looking at them. Do you see that a lot in what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kelowna has the largest homelessness issue of any city its size in Canada, and people don't expect that here. But the numbers of hidden homeless are probably 3 or 4 times that which of the sort of visual, sort of episodically homeless or chronically homeless. And so our center and our community would consist of probably 400 or 500 people who would call Metro their home, many of whom perhaps are on a faith journey. Many would say, hey, I'm not even sure what I believe in, but they would say Metro's their home. And they might have a couch, they might even have an apartment that they rent, and they might be just getting by, or they kind of lose it, and then they kind of find another place, and they're kind of constantly moving. But they would anchor themselves in community with us.
It's hard to know what to do. A lot of this is affordable housing. It's issues outside of our control. But what can we, as people of faith, do to change or to make a difference for people who are struggling with this?
Well, I have the privilege of being involved across the country through a number of different networks that are involved at street level work across Canada. And what we see time and time again is that the church is largely absent from the conversation going on at municipal levels around housing, around solutions. Many churches have huge parking lots and buildings that sit largely underutilized for most of the week, and they're not even participating in the conversation at a municipal level. And frankly, I think most cities and authorities aren't even engaging with the churches because they think that they don't want to play a part. And so we have, by virtue of just who we are, been invited into conversations. And again, it's not because of those who are middle class in our community somehow having some expertise, but actually the expertise that we provide is at the hands of those who've experienced homelessness and issues around affordable housing and so on. So, for example, we're developing an app at the moment that's kind of like an Airbnb software solution for landlords and tenants who can basically communicate in a more dignifying and a more just way together, so that both the landlord and the tenant have an opportunity to sort of prove themselves and be vetted. And in the middle, there's a sort of escrow bunch of funds that provide security for both. And so, those are the kind of solutions I think churches can be involved in, but largely aren't right now.
I love that. That's such a great challenge to us to get involved at the municipal level and find creative solutions. Thank you so much, Lawrence, for all that you're doing. We are cheering you on here from Ontario.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. We'll be right back.
According to a report released in 2013 on homelessness, at least 200,000 Canadians experience homelessness each year in Canada, and at least 50,000 Canadians are part of the hidden homeless and on any given night. Joining me today to talk a little further about this growing problem in our country are three amazing people who have devoted their lives to serving those in the margins of our community. Corinne Hardy is the Executive Director of Helping Hand Street Mission. Jesse Sudirigo, did I get it right? Sudirigo, I'm sorry, is the Manager of Street Involved Services at Yonge Street Mission. And Dion Oxford is Mission Strategist of Salvation Army's homeless shelters in Toronto. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
It really is an honor to sit with all of you. I respect all of you and just how you've been able to really tackle such a big issue, and it can be overwhelming at times. I want to start off with the federal budget. So we, heard about the federal budget a couple of weeks ago. There was an announcement that about $11.2 billion would be designated to affordable housing, homelessness issues. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, it's the first time in a while that we've seen the federal government actually designate such a large amount of money to this issue. Is it going to happen? Is it going to work?
I would say, homelessness did begin about 25 years ago because government started to pull out the way we understand homelessness today. So I think, yes, this is a great sign that we're trying to get back to where we've come from. $11 billion over 11 years is a lot of money. I mean, yes, it's a lot of money, but it's not going to solve the problem. But I think it's a good start. So last night, for example, in Toronto, the Salvation Army was running about 600 beds, shelter beds for folks who are homeless, men and women, and they were all full. And out of the 60 or so shelters in Toronto altogether, about 4,000 people last night were living in shelters. So to date, we haven't seen the housing. I guess for those of us who have been around for a long time, a little skeptical, but when we see the housing, we'll believe that we're heading in the right direction.
What are some of the issues we need to understand when it comes to, especially this issue of hidden homelessness? Because I think that's something that fascinates me because, you can literally be sitting beside somebody at work in your cubicle next to you who is couch surfing, who cannot pay the rent. What do we need to understand about this issue, Corinne?
I think we need to understand the security that comes in knowing that you have a place of your own. And we need to combat the attitudes that perhaps people who don't understand that comes in, how that impacts people. For example, as some people may think that if you've got a couch to sleep on, you're good, and not consider that homelessness. But the fact is, it's undignified, and it's not garnering respect for the individual. So we need to combat the attitudes of others, whether it's family members. I mean, to not understand that, it's great that family can be supportive and offer someone a couch to sleep on, but it's not enabling them and giving them the independence that they need. And that in itself is such an obstacle for people who are struggling in that way.
Yeah. I work with specifically with street-involved youth in Toronto, and you know, a lot of them some of them you can't tell that they're homeless. You know, they're wearing some Jordans sometimes. They're decked out pretty well, but they might wear it every day. You know what I mean? And you just don't know. And a lot of it is even despite the fact that they might be, number one, they're either couch surfing, they're in a shelter, or they're living rough on the streets, right? But if hidden homelessness occurs a lot of the times, the part that actually affects them a lot is the fact that they have no vantage point, you know, to go to. You know, like for me, I have my father. I had a plumbing problem the other day, and who do I call? You know what I'm saying? I call my dad. I can have a vantage point to something. And so a lot of these youth, there's just no centering, no anchoring a lot of that times. And that is hugely disruptive in making any kind of progress in life. So that's kind of it feels intangible, but it's actually really significant in any kind of progress, especially as a youth.
So I'm hearing this and I'm feeling overwhelmed as a Canadian who cares about the fact that people don't have a home. And so when you hear this, it's like, okay, this seems so insurmountable. Like, how do I actually tackle this? How do you, I mean, all of you are on the front lines of this. How do you deal with this? How do you tackle it every single day?
Yeah. Well, just to jump in a little bit, I think that going back to your original question about all that money that's going in, when you think about Toronto, though, it has a lot of money to begin with, right? And maybe not enough dollars from the government coming into it, but in a way, it's how it's used is the main question. You know what I'm saying? Like, how is it going to be channeled and effectively used? I think we need to leverage the capacity that we already have and actually look at that first. What are we doing it right? Because if we keep on putting money into solutions that we create that are not actually effective or not coordinated, for example, like everyone doing the same things in their own little silos. And so, for example, in the Youngster Mission, we're really trying to emphasize how can we leverage each other's assets within a community, whether we're a part of the same organization or not, in order to actually increase our capacity as like a collective impact, as they call it these days, for us to actually engage the problem. So I think that is more of an issue, and once we get that, then we can channel the money through an effective, coordinated strategy.
I also like the attitude change comment that I heard earlier too. Like, even talking about people as homeless people as opposed to people experiencing homelessness, that's a big attitude change. If we talk about a homeless person, the homelessness becomes sometimes the whole curriculum vitae of that human being. As opposed to a person experiencing homelessness just becomes then one part of who they are. So all the people that are coming in through the doors of our shelters or living on the streets or living in their cars or sleeping on couches, they're real people with real red blood running through their veins. And the church needs to start there with this attitude change about who are the people and recognize it's not an us and them question. We're all in this thing together. Nobody's different. We're all created in the image of God. We all have God likeness in us. And it's not about fixing those people's problems. We're all together.
Well said. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back. And when we return, I want to talk about solutions, ways that you have seen your agencies work to tackle this issue of hidden homelessness. We'll be right back.
Still to come on 100 Huntley Street. We explore the matter and concerns for the hidden homeless, those living temporarily with family, friends, or in their car, and we talk with people who are helping neighbors in need.
God's love is like a fire. When it ignites and when it spreads, it can transform anyone.
I called 100 Huntley Street the prayer line, and that was a real turning point in my salvation.
We serve a God who can take the ashes, the broken pieces of our life, and he can make something beautiful.
So I said, God, if you're this real, I will do anything that you want me to do.
God's love story can inspire anyone to make a difference in the lives of people around the world.
We are very sure, we are very optimistic about our future because we know we will plant, we will have water to drink.
You become influential by setting a new pace. The gospel is timeless.
Every single person has a story, but we're all part of God's greater story, which is the greatest story of all.
There really is a noticeably growing spiritual hunger among people these days. Research proves it. The volume of calls into our prayer center show it. The 750,000 views every month on the programs on the internet say it. People are worried, they're afraid, unsure of the future. They're hurting, lonely, and they're seeking. But God's love is like a fire. It ignites, it spreads, and it transforms. His love makes all the difference. And of course, there's no greater event than Jesus' death and resurrection on the cross that speaks of His great love. Never in the 40 years of 100 Huntley Street's wonderful history has broadcasting faith-based media been so critical to telling Canadians about Jesus, about how He is the world's only hope. All of us at Crossroads, we wish for you and your family a time of quiet reflection, reconnection, or perhaps a first-time discovery of Jesus. And if you would like to partner with us, if you would like to personally give us your hand to help hold this megaphone of the gospel that we are, then why don't you become a monthly faith partner right now? Our monthly partners are the backbone of this ministry, whether it's $10, $25, $50, or perhaps even $100 a month. Your regular gift will be like that spark that starts a transformation in the life of someone who desperately needs God's love. 1-800-265-3100. Call us right now or sign up online at crossroads.ca/donate. As we continue our look at the issue of hidden homelessness, here's a story of a church that decided to make a difference, to help their neighbors in need. Take a look at this.
Hamilton, Ontario is experiencing a resurgence. After decades of decline due to industry closings and layoffs, there's now a huge influx of new businesses, restaurants, cafes, and a growing arts community.
Hamilton is being revitalized, and there's wonderful stories on that, but this is the dark side of that wonderful story, the shadow side of the consequences for folks who can't compete in a revitalized city.
As housing prices continue to escalate in Hamilton, there's less and less housing that is affordable, predominantly because numbers of rental incomes that aren't owned by the government or other agencies acted as affordable housing and don't any longer. The affordable housing crisis is actually at a peak.
Longtime resident of North Hamilton, Pastor Dwayne Klein, decided it was time for his church to get involved.
Our church specifically has gotten involved with this issue because as we read through Scripture, we see God calling us to care for others. And what does it mean to care for them? What does it mean when Isaiah 58 says that we are to provide food, that we're to provide shelter, that we're to care for those? Or you read Isaiah 1, and every word that's associated with caring for people is an action word from us to those that are more marginalized. So we already offer food bank and clothing ministry. We already offer ministries to immigrants and refugees, sheltered environments and youth drop-ins for people to come and a safe place for people to hang out and be a part of. And so then we said, what about housing? What about a place where people could actually live?
After having many conversations about the issue with Indwell, a charitable organization that builds affordable housing, a unique partnership soon developed.
We owned a piece of property. Indwell and myself toured our neighborhood talking about various properties in the neighborhood. And Indwell said, what about the property you own? And then we began a conversation, a journey with our church about what about that property, where our church agreed that we should put housing in with our new church facility on this property on James Street in downtown Hamilton.
Once built, the multi-use facility will house both church congregation and its outreach programs right alongside 46 affordable housing units.
The beautiful thing is that in this relationship is the Christian community coming together to do something in a way that's very tangible, it's ongoing, it's relational. If we can take the same approach, if every church in our country had a housing component on their building, we wouldn't have homelessness.
So what can people do to solve this huge issue of affordable housing?
Christians have this ultimate solution in Jesus, and as we learn to die to ourselves so that others can live, we actually learn to live off less and give away more. And in living off less to give away more, we're able to share our homes with people that need housing. And so some of the solution comes from us taking people in to live with us who are in need of housing. Some of the solution comes by finding people that can afford to build housing for those that need it and encouraging them to do so, or working together with others to do so.
When I read through the scriptures, I see a Jesus who found himself on the edges of society, who went outside of the city and touched lepers that no one else wanted to touch. So I'd ask Canadians to think, who are the folks living on the fringes, on the margins, in your neighborhood, in your city? Who are the ones that are the untouchables that God's calling you to go out and build relationships with? Invest in one person. Invite that person into the life of your family. Learn from that person. Hear their story. Hear their experience. You won't be the same.
That makes me excited to be a part of a community that cares and wants to see change. We're back with our panel of experts, people who have dedicated their lives to helping those on the margins of our community that have found themselves among the homeless or hidden homeless population. Now, I want to start with you, Corinne. We kind of cut you short earlier on. Tell us about, we want to talk about solutions now. Tell us about what Helping Hands is able to do.
Well, we come alongside some of those who are living in poverty, whether it's actually living with homelessness, hidden homelessness, or just struggling to make ends meet. Imagine what it would be like, whether you have a home or not, to have to take from the little bit of money you have for food so that you can go buy hygiene items. And this is particularly difficult for women who at certain times cannot avoid hygiene items. So we try to help meet the tangible needs of those who are struggling with poverty so that they can use what they do have for the things that are not being covered for them, like a roof over their head or in some cases a sleeping bag, and we provide those things also. So we have a free clothing store that and where we also disperse hygiene items and things like that. And we really are working intentionally to try and make connections within the neighborhood and with other agencies. And I think that that's going to be integral at building solutions, is if everybody who is working, all the different organizations, work together, pool their resources, and tap into one another's gifts and talents.
And you're located in the Hamilton area. I just read a amazing stat that 80% of people who access food banks in Hamilton cannot pay the rent.
Yes.
So it's either food or it's rent.
Exactly.
Each month.
Yeah.
Jesse, you kind of alluded to that as well. How do we work together as a community? Talk about what Yonge Street Mission is able to do in partnering with other organizations.
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of things of knowing how to even just gauge how to engage with the community and understanding what are the assets that each one has to offer. You know, I think the main thing is when you, as I was talking about the silos and kind of coming out of that, knowing how to have on-ramps and off-ramps into different organizations within a community so it feels like a seamless transition between one place to another. Like imagine if you're someone who is homeless and the organizations are working so well together that you don't even know that you're walking in different like organizations, right? I know that sounds like an ideal situation, but you know we're doing that in Regent Park. We're trying to work with mental health practitioners, with street-involved youth in our Evergreen Center over there, and trying to make it feel like a seamless process for them. And I think that's a really important aspect in that system navigation and just walking through that and making it easy for people.
And Dion, we've known each other for quite a while. You've been working in this area for many, many years. And so how do you see, you know, with your work with Salvation Army, what can we do? What are some of the solutions we need to look at?
Yeah, what we know for sure is that the end of good social work is not more social work.
Yeah.
It's connecting people with community. So one of the things we've been trying to do out of our shelters is a program we call Causeway, thecauseway.ca. You can check it out. I'm really excited about it. The idea is when someone moves out of our shelter, we're housing about 25 people per month out of our shelters off the street into their own place. We realize that when people come back to us, which we call recidivism, the number one reason for that, and now we have research that proves what we already knew, the number one reason over 90% of people is because of loneliness. So for us, we're trying to connect people who move out of our shelters into communities just like the ones we live in, and with the church. We've been told there's thousands of churches in Toronto. All these people who sit in the pews, who claim to worship Jesus, and we're saying, well, why don't you come alongside someone? You don't need to sell all your stuff. You don't need to come down and work on the streets. You can be a soccer mom, and if you have 1 hour extra a week to come alongside someone and have coffee at Tim Hortons or whatever, and befriend someone, that I think would really cut down on loneliness and recidivism. That's where the church can come in, just things like simple things. It's not rocket science. You don't need 14 years of social work school to figure this out. It's loving God and loving neighbor. That's what we've been called to, and it can work, and it does work.
And I heard, Tim Richter spoke earlier on. He was talking about we need to move away from managing homelessness.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing all of you saying, mm-hmm. What does that mean, moving away from managing homelessness?
Yeah, I think it's about the idea of actually getting, like, street-involved youth. 75% of the street-involved youth go back into homelessness, back and forth, right? And so imagine that, 75% go between 1 to 5 times back into homelessness. So we need places of belonging, just like what Dion is saying, and places where people can be received into there. Yeah.
All right, well, we have run out of time. Thank you so much. This is such a great conversation. We always get cut short, but I cherish all of you, and I thank you for your input on such an important topic.
Thank you for taking the time for it, yes.
Yeah. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
It fills you. When you're hungry, dying of thirst, nothing left inside, and all alone. You hunger. You wander in a land where there's no food, dry, empty, and void. But then I come. I am the bread of life. When you come to me, you will be filled. Hunger disappears. You will thirst no more. Come, all who are weary, all who are weak. Draw near to me. I will feed you. I will give you rest. I will come giving bread in the wilderness. Here you will find welcome without end. I won't stop at what you need. No, I will give you so much more. A table filled with plenty. No jar, no plate, no container will be able to hold my gifts to you. I will overflow more than you need. I will satisfy and fulfill. I will delight your soul. It's everlasting. It's overwhelming. It never ends. Love. It's my promise to you.
At least 250,000 people experience homelessness in a single year. 35,000 Canadians are homeless on any given night. There's a lot of work to be done to fix this issue.
But what I was encouraged by the panel discussion we had is that there are so many people actually doing something. And I think it's a good challenge for us as, people who, it might be your coworker that is surfing, couch surfing at the moment, not able to afford rent, afford a mortgage. How can we help? How can we actually be and care for our neighbor and love our neighbor?
We need to ask questions. I think we need to be not afraid to ask people questions and maybe not get too personal, but I think there's times when people would like to tell us their story and we don't make ourselves very open to that kind of conversation. I think we can't help somebody if we don't know. So
yeah, but divulging to somebody that you are homeless,
no, that's huge.
Can be hard.
It is huge.
And so I just take solace in knowing that we have great people that are working in that field. And I think Dion gave us a great challenge. Taking somebody out for coffee, and maybe you're right. Maybe even just starting that conversation.
But you got to get to know people, right?
Yes.
If you don't know them, you can't get to the place where you can ask that question. Or without relationship, they'll never be able to divulge that to you. So get to know people, ask questions, build that relationship so you can make your community and your world a better place.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads, a member of the Canadian Council of Christian Charities. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 4M2.